Cool. Okay, so as Mike introduced my name is Nick Cusick. I work with the Pierce Conservation District, along with my colleague, James Moore, who's also on the call. Um, he's not going to speak. I'm kind of taking over this whole thing today, but we're kind of in this process where I'm winding down my time with PCD. James is taking over full time, so he's really going to be the point of contact for follow up if you're interested in the REAP grant program. Looking forward to sharing more with you about REAP, how it can help your farmers make the switch to solar or energy efficiency. We've put on this webinar before with CTD. We've also presented at Wade, but it's been quite some time. And so we figured it'd be a good idea to bring this back around to networking with CDs, especially since within the past several months, we've had a few different folks reach out to our program. So glad you're here. We'll jump in. Mike, could you go to the next slide? So before getting into REAP itself, I wanted to share a little bit of background about who we are and our team. Our team includes several partners from Pierce Conservation District, a nonprofit in Seattle called Spark Northwest, the Latino Educational Training Institute, the Center for Inclusive Entrepreneurship, and Sustainable Connections. And our team works together to cover the entire state of Washington. So although James and I work with Pierce Conservation District, we're actually able to help farmers and businesses in your conservation district service areas as well. And one of our partners, Spark Northwest, also covers Oregon. We have been doing this work now for over 8 years, and we've helped over 200 farmers and rural small businesses apply for the REAP grant to do solar, to do energy efficiency, a couple of biodigester projects as well. And then on top of that, we've educated several hundred more. Next slide. As far as how we can help you, how we can help your farmers, we are funded from a different USDA grant, which means we can help your clients at zero cost. As far as what we're able to do itself, we're able to offer technical assistance that includes looking economically at the project, whether it fits within financial projections for the business, since it's often the case that as a farmer, they have several other capital investment projects. We review available incentives. We help determine eligibility for different grant programs. We're also able to provide energy assessments, which, as applicable to the REAP program, it's needed for both energy efficiency, but in the case of solar, if there's a residence located on the property. And I'll get into more details regarding that in a second. And then the biggest chunk is that we develop the REAP grant applications for the farmer, for the business, so that they don't have to do that paperwork themselves. It's a very light touch with how much work is on their plate as far as delivering business documents, working with the contractor to deliver design documents, etc. But our team takes on the majority of that work there. Next slide. The REAP grant, REAP stands for Rural Energy for America program. It's been around since 2008 with the Farm Bill. It's administered by USDA Rural Development Office. REAP is both a grant and a secured loan program for both renewable energy, energy efficiency improvement projects, which kind of run the gamut from more efficient heating and cooling, lighting, irrigation, basically anything that plugs into the wall if it conserves energy and it's upgraded, it's eligible for energy efficiency. With 2022's passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, there was a lot more money pumped into the program, a couple billion dollars more, actually. And what was once a 25% reimbursable grant has now become a 50% grant. Now, that is not guaranteed after September 30th, when this Inflation Reduction Act sunsets. But if you're tracking it right now, the Farm Bill is currently under negotiation in committee in Congress, and REAP is, as it's currently drafted up between both party proposals, looking like it'll stay at the 50% level. No guarantee with that, though. So we're really trying to emphasize right now, if folks are feeling ready to consider a solar project, now is better than later, because there's no guarantee, and that 50% level does make a big difference. Minimum grant award is $2,500. Maximum award for very large projects is $1 million. Usually we see in the level of, and it depends on the size of the farm, energy and consumption and stuff, but usually we see between $40,000 and $60,000. So total project size of 80 to 120,000. Next slide. As far as eligibility goes, and this is something that we always go in depth with the interested farmer or business during an intake call, because each case is a little bit unique, but there are two different avenues that someone could qualify for the grant. One is as an agricultural producer, and USDA has a very technical definition for that. It's at least 50% of gross sales being come from agricultural products. Agricultural producers can also be located in urban or rural areas. Now, as might be the case with some smaller farmers, if the farmer doesn't hit that 50% level, they could qualify as a rural small business, but then they would need to be in a rural area. Rural small business is a larger classification, and we've had all types of businesses apply for this grant, as long as they're an LLC, as long as they generate business revenue, they qualify. There is an eligibility map. USC has drawn polygons on a map for what's eligible, what isn't. I'll show what that looks like in a couple of slides. There's one other eligibility criteria for what small means. So the U.S. Small Business Administration has a table of codes. It's called NAICS size standards. If you Google that, we also have a copy of it, but if you Google NAICS, NAICS code size standards, there's a PDF you can look based on the business description, and it'll show you kind of the limits for that based on that. And I will say, very typically those are quite high. And I think I've only had one instance out of those 200 that exceeded that limit amount. It's a pretty generous limit. There's some other important eligibility criteria. The applicant needs to demonstrate ownership of the project. And so that can happen in one of two ways. They can either own the property outright, and you can print parcel information with that, or a deed. Or in the case of others, if they lease the property, the lease needs to include some language that shows that either the term of the lease will cover the life of the project, or some other kind of arrangement with the landowner itself. Residences, again, that gets a little tricky, and so I'll wade into that in a couple slides. Commitment of funds. This is a reimbursable grant, so USDA needs some assurance that the applicant can pay for the project up front, or has a financing option through a guaranteed loan or a line of credit. And then finally, the applicant needs to have legal authority, i.e. be the business owner to apply. Next slide. Finally, over the past few years, we've seen a real uptick in the number of people interested in the grant and the number of people asking for help with that. And so we're trying to rearrange things to ensure that we're helping the people that need our help the most. And so there are instances where very large businesses are well-resourced and the REAP grant isn't make or break for them. And so we're really trying to pivot towards smaller businesses, low wealth, socially disadvantaged. That includes BIPOC, veterans, or women-owned. And then median household income, we kind of have a marker for that too. This isn't a hard criteria or eligibility. We encourage everybody to reach out to us. It's just a way to set aside a little bit more of our capacity for people that kind of fit in these criteria or priority groups. Although we really try to help as many people as possible. Next slide. I brought up the eligibility map. So USDA has this published on their website. It's an interactive web viewer. So you punch in an address and then it has a little pop-up that says, this address is rural and eligible for REAP, or this address is not eligible. And it might be a little difficult to tell, but you can see in some areas, around Yakima, especially in Seattle, Tacoma metro area, these kind of yellow polygons, those are kind of urban areas. So ineligible as a rural, ineligible based on the rural criteria. Although again, as a farmer, they could be located in those areas. You could also, because that's a pretty lengthy hyperlink, just Google USDA REAP eligibility map, and that would be able to pop up very easily. Next slide. I'm going to spend a little bit more time with this because it is often the case with farms that a residence is co-located on the property. USDA makes very, very clear, and the regulations spell this out as well, that REAP only pays for business electric usage or farm electric usage. It does not pay for the home, and that includes farm worker housing. Of course, there's a good argument to be made that, if the person is working the land, that the resident should be eligible too, and that's actually being discussed with the new farm bill. But as of this moment, the residence doesn't qualify. Now, the threshold is that, of the energy that the solar panels generates, at least 50% needs to go to the business. And then it's essentially prorated, or it's pulled out the amount that's being supplied to the residents. So that business portion is the only part that's eligible for reimbursement. So to kind of illustrate this, if there's a $10,000 project, 50% of the energy is going to the business, remaining going to the residents. Instead of a 50% grant or a $5,000 grant, the business is only going to be eligible for a 25% grant or $2,500. Now, as far as the assistance we're able to provide, if the business or the farm is connected to 1 meter and then the residence is connected to a second meter on the property, it's really easy to split out those numbers and make that clear in the application itself and the reimbursable amount. But it's trickier if all of that is combined on the same meter. And so that's where our team comes in and we provide a more in-depth assessment to kind of tease out, okay, there are all these appliances in the home, there's all this equipment being used in the barn or storage or whatever. and then we kind of create an estimate from that. Okay, I think that's it on that side. So next. So there are a couple of upcoming deadlines on the horizon, most immediately June 30th, and then September 30th also. After that, we are not quite clear with the Farm Bill, whether it's going to go back to the old way of doing things, which was a fall deadline at the end of October and then one at the end of March, or if they're going to keep it at quarterly applications at the end of each quarter. Next slide. So because it takes time to assemble all of the documentation, the grant paperwork, and all of that from the business owner and the contractor, our team usually likes to see people come through the door at least a month or 6 weeks before the deadline, and all of that information on our desks. And that ensures that we have enough time to piece everything together, conduct a more thorough review, an environmental assessment of the property, etc. As is the case with in familiar for those for applying for grants, there can always be a little bit of procrastination in last minute requests. So we do try to emphasize when educating folks, the more lead up time that we get, the better for everyone involved. Step 2, again, deadlines are quarterly, at least at the moment. We get folks asking when they can actually start the project or begin construction. And technically, that can occur as soon as the REAP application has been submitted and USDA gives their thumbs up, says this looks complete. I usually advise people, though, to wait until they hear whether they got the grant, because they're going to shoot themselves in the foot if they apply for the grant, they install the project, and then they find out a couple of months later that they didn't get it, because then the project is no longer eligible to apply again for the grant for another shot. Usually that requires a conversation between the business owner and the contractor as well, just to ensure that everybody is on the same page there. USDA is mandated from the federal government that they need to review all applications, score, and post award information 3 months after the application deadline. So not 3 months after the application is submitted, but 3 months after the deadline. And so I usually like to inform people of that. Grant reimbursement happens 2 to 4 weeks after the project has been installed. It's online, it's showing performance data, and then that reimbursement is routed to the applicant's bank account. And then finally, after funds have been obligated, there is some additional paperwork required from USDA. I'm not going to get into that because at that point, our team isn't very much involved, but the USDA grant administrator, program manager, and the applicant continue to go back and forth and sign till the project is finalized and funds have been transferred. Next slide. So I'm going to wrap up with some final disclaimers, and I like to convey this information to applicants as well. There's no guarantee of being awarded. There is more money that's been invested into the program, which translates to more projects being funded, but it is competitive. And there have been a couple, well, there was one instance where we worked with an applicant and they had been under the impression that they were definitely going to get it. They installed, and then they unfortunately missed out on the grant and trying to apply again. So very much try to emphasize that. Again, can't begin construction or even submit a down payment until the application has been submitted. Needing that lead up time to complete all the application paperwork at least a month before the deadline. And then finally, liking to emphasize that there are some terms and conditions to submitting that application. And so the applicant ultimately has a responsibility over that timely submittal, and then a final review of the application paperwork. That's a step in the process before signing to make sure that everything's accurate and in order. Although we have a ton of experience at this point where that is pretty minimal workload for the applicant, since we have such a deep experience and knowledge base with these. Next slide. So finally, here are a few different ways to get a hold of us. We have a coordinator on our team that speaks Spanish. And so for English speakers, they can head over to an intake form. They just fill out some basic information about themselves and whether they've already spoken with a contractor, what kind of technology they're interested in, etc. And also, I spoke with Mike on this before we began this webinar. We have an information packet, which I think would be really helpful both for you, but then also for farmers that you're out doing site visits with to just have on hand or just have printed off at your office. And that's it. So I'm not sure if folks have typed in anything into the chat as far as questions, but now is that time where folks can come off of mute. I'll kind of let Mike facilitate this part of the webinar.
Thank you. Yeah, any questions, you can type those in the chat. I will also put some of those links that we just looked at into the chat as well, if that will be helpful for everyone else. Let me bring up those. There's the intake form link, and I believe we also had a link to the eligibility map. Okay.
Thanks, Mike.
Of course. And then we will send out I'll send out the packet or the informational packet that Nick mentioned after this. And this recording will also be connected to the CTD website as well. Any questions? I don't see anything in the chat. Nick, you want to type your email or James, either one of you, in case anyone has any questions they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, James, could you put your email in the chat?
Will do.
Thanks.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, when you conduct sort of the assessment of each site, do you do a site visit for that, or is it just over the phone that you're able to meet with the landowner?
It is not an in-person site assessment. We're able to do it pretty easily over the phone. But I will say, one of our partners, and I failed to mention this, but one of our partners, Sustainable Connections, they work in North Puget Sound, so they're only able to, don't quote me on this, I think they're only able to work in San Juan Island, Whatcom, in Skagit County. maybe Snohomish too, to do in-depth energy audits, which look more closely at the building envelope and are more robust than those energy assessments. So if any of you work in North Puget Sound with the CDs up there, that might be a service that we're able to offer.
All right. Looks like in the chat, someone asked if anaerobic digesters were funded through this program.
They are eligible. We have only worked with one, and it was a very, very small project. We've had a lot of people approach us interested in larger biodigesters for dairies, but they've never quite hit that threshold of number or head count, I guess, for the technology to really be financially or even technically feasible. So if you have something in mind, it's definitely worth reaching out to us, though, because I do know that there are instances of very large dairies out there that might or might not be a good fit.
Thank you. Any other questions, anyone? Oh.
Yeah.
Thank you. You're welcome. All right. If there's no other questions, we can go ahead and give you a half an hour back of your day. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you again, Nick, for this. This is very helpful information. And again, we will send out an email with all that other information as well and get this connected to the CTD website if you want to go back and review this information. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Mike.
Thank you.
Bye.